aggression and toileting, emotional regulation. And as I continued to ask more questions, the parent disclosed that the student had experienced abuse at a child care after school the previous school year. So this really shifted how I understood the presenting concerns, and it made it clear that we needed to look beyond ADHD and we needed to look at possibly an emotional disability. Because that information came out through our conversation, I was able to make immediate connections to mental health supports and be more intentional about the scope of my assessment. It hasn't been completed yet, but the student has started some counseling in the meantime, and I've been able to begin building some type of relationship at school with them.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really powerful example that of how our direct interviews can surface some of that critical information. It would have been difficult to capture that if you would have just like sent home that written documentation. I think that helps us explain the why when we look at the outcomes later on. We sometimes see a disconnect between the identified needs and the supports that are written into our IEPs. And so the data we collect early on doesn't always capture that full picture. Thank you again for sharing. Does anybody else want to share on or build on that experience?
I can share. I had a different experience, not as in depth though, but definitely actually did an in-person interview with a parent, and the parent shared a lot of helpful information about how the student was de-escalated at home because we were really struggling with how to maybe help the student, and so and doing that interview process, we were able to figure out how they were handling or supporting and that student to de-escalate at home, and they really created a clear structure and clear boundaries for that student and help that student to de-escalate better in their educational setting. So that interview process really helped both parent and us to collaborate and see eye to eye and also understand that student too.
I agree. I also feel like the mom opened up more because the interview felt more conversational. They seemed less guarded than they were previously when I had spoken to them, and it helped build trust early on in the process.
That's really awesome. I love how that highlights like the consistency too between home and school. Anybody else?
Yeah, and from my perspective, being looped in these conversations earlier has really helped a lot. I felt more prepared during the IEP meeting because I understood where the assessment was headed and why certain areas were being targeted. I also
Awesome.
aligned these with things I was seeing in my classroom. So I felt more engaged in the discussion rather than just reacting to the final report.
And I think during our huddles, other teachers really benefited from hearing what you were doing in your classroom that was working for the student. But also on the flip side, we just haven't had time to do that with every case or with all of the teachers, especially at the junior high where the students have more than one teacher.
I can really appreciate that. So what I'm hearing is that early direct communication can help us better understand the student context. It helps us align our assessment decisions. It helps engage more of our team members in meaningful ways. What's significant about that shift and how we collaborate during assessments is that we're strengthening the quality of the data that informs us for eligibility goals, services, but it doesn't really like require you to add new tools or requirements in that. I do think that's beneficial. At the same time, I do want to like note that I'm sure that there are real challenges with time scheduling and figuring out what's most feasible across different settings. So before we wrap up, what are some things you think we should keep an eye on as we continue piloting these?
So I think that beyond just having more time, I think it's also about having our information broken down in a way that makes pre-IEP huddles a little bit more meaningful and efficient. So that means having thorough assessments completed early enough so that we can talk about the recommendations productively.
I also think it's about timing, knowing when collaboration is most helpful in the process. Sometimes it's occurring too early or too late. For example, if we're mid-assessment and we start noticing some additional concerns like autism, it would help to identify that earlier so that areas like pragmatics or speech and language can be assessed sooner.
That's really helpful. So for now, let's just keep piloting this approach during upcoming assessments. Pay attention to where these conversations feel like very impactful and manageable. And we're going to convene later this month on October 29th and just continue to look for patterns, refine what this could look like across school sites and what adjustments might need to be made.